It's the Doomed and Stoned podcast with your host, Billy Goat. Hang out with us for the next few as we explore the music and the stories of the heavy underground. Brought to you by doomedandstoned.com. Hey, welcome to the Doomed and Stoned Show. I'm Billy Goat, your host, and with me, as usual, is John Gist from Vegas Rock Revolution, but we do have a special guest. We are excited to have Mr. Todd Severin from Ripple Music. Welcome, Todd.
I'm really excited to be here with you guys tonight. Hope you've been well during this crazy time.
John, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Been looking forward to tonight for a while. Already have drank my second cocktail out of my Dallas Cowboys. Man, what do you call it? High top glass, whatever the fuck. So it looks good, tastes good. So thank you.
Well, I got my tequila in a skull-shaped shot glass, so cheers to you guys.
There you go. Cheers.
And I'm just sucking on some Diet Dr. Cherry Pepper, you know.
Put
real exciting there.
Put a little bourbon in there, probably all right. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm more of a whiskey guy myself, but not tonight.
So, Todd, you're here.
I am. John, good talking to you again, man. We haven't been on the radio together in ages.
It's been a little while. Absolutely. Great to have you.
You had that great radio show that you were doing in Vegas. That was such a great show you did.
Yeah, that was fun. You, me, and Mike Varney.
Oh,
Mike Varney.
An animal. Love that guy.
Think about how many people, Todd, right now that will hear this show later. A lot of them aren't going to know who Mike Varney is. Isn't that interesting? Nor did Billy. So imagine that.
You know, and the thing about Varney that's amazing is his whole life's amazing, but not just that he started Shrapnel Records and discovered and actually created an entire genre of music, which was the shredder metal with Yngwie, and I think Vi was on his label. I know that he's worked with Schenker and all those other guys.
From Nick Alpine.
Nick Alpine. I think he did,
it's never ending. Richie Coxon from Winery Dogs, who's doing really well nowadays.
The guy who became the guitarist for David Lee Roth, was it Jason Becker?
Yeah, I believe so. Absolutely.
All these guys. But he's got like two other labels. He's got a blues label and he's also got a prog label. I think it's called Magna Carta. The guy's insane, and he's a hell of a guitarist himself.
Nice.
I've seen him. Billy, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say this was all happening while I was in grade school, so forgive my ignorance.
Oh boy. Well, let's ask you, what were you listening to?
My first exposure to heavy music was
No.
Cinderella
But that wasn't the question. What were you listening to in grade school when Todd was listening to Shredder?
I would say the first thing that I listened to was the Ghostbusters soundtrack. And
nice.
That had
controversial song too.
Yeah.
Seriously, man. Who are you gonna call?
I wanted a Michael Jackson jacket after hearing his contribution to I think he was on there. But anyway, he was popular at the same time. So Michael Jackson was just the bomb in grade school.
Right.
And then as I got a little bit older, I got into, heavy metal ballads. And then eventually the family got cable, and that was a novelty. MTV was on there. I saw the Metallica 1 video, and that changed my world.
Whoa.
As it did so many.
Why?
It was probably the most intense, brutal thing my little 11, 12-year-old mind had seen at that point. And it just sounded really cool,
terrifying.
But it was also very shocking to my mind at the time.
The black and white to it, the flashing. Yeah, it was designed, to obviously get us to go, whoa, what the hell's going on? And that's exactly the way some of us old school metal fans felt when we heard the song, like, what's going on here? In not a happy way. And so that was a very controversial song. Great for you, and great for many. It was one of the biggest hits ever. But for some of us, we were like, whoa, it's all right, but I'll take other songs. Yeah, it's very weird. It was a weird time in rock and metal when that happened.
What was it about that song that's so off-putting to you, John?
Well, John was always more of a Great White fan, we learned last episode.
I admit to all my dirty laundry, Michael Jackson lover, you.
Well, and that's the end of the show, guys. We're done now. He's a Great White lover. Nothing more needs to be said.
I used to like Michael Jackson, too. More of the off-wall stuff, when he had the fro and everything. It was a little cool. But did you ask me what was off-putting about that song?
Yeah. Why did it strike you?
I just didn't like it. It was because it was different, because Metallica always had slow songs. Fade to Black is one that holds a little dark spot in my life, unfortunately, but it was slow and different. So it wasn't because that song was slow and different to bother me. I don't know what, it just, I guess at that time of my life, I was digging other stuff a lot more. And I really was into Kill 'Em All right from the minute it started. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I was into Metallica as early. I mean, I didn't know anyone else that was into Metallica other than me and my friends. You know what I mean? Whole high school. It was crazy. I went to high school with 1,500 people. And so, they changed over the years, but it's all no. That song, though, it is a little harrowing on the video, and it's cut from a movie. You know that?
Right.
Which one?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I feel about 90% sure.
Okay.
I'm right. Yeah, it's not a whim. But what about for you, Todd? What was your not favorite song, but like favorite album by Metallica, if you are a Metallica aficionado?
Johnny Got His Gun is the name of the film.
There it is. That's it.
1971 American drama anti-war film that I am reading off the computer. I am not doing this for my music.
No, I know. we do that all the time.
Dude, so I'm a little bit different. You know, I'm older than you guys. Let me rephrase that. I'm a bit older than you whippersnappers. And I got into Metallica retroactively, if you can understand what I'm saying, because I missed the entire thing. I pretty much missed a lot of what was happening in music between 80... Well, I started becoming a radio disc jockey in 1981, but the radio station was new wave punk, and I did a lot of goth. Like, I was totally into Southern Death Cult, which became the Death Cult, which became the Cult. I mean, you know, Theater of Hate, Bauhaus. I was really into a lot of the dark stuff, as well as the synth. I mean, whatever was punk. I got really into the aggressive first and second wave British punks.
And you grew up in Northern California, right?
I grew up in Northern California. The school was in Southern California, so this was during the heyday of the LA punk scene too. I mean, X used to play at my college. You know, you have a college party and X plays at it. It was pretty cool, and you had, you know, Black Flag and, you know, the Vandals and Fear, and all those bands were just bands in the area. So it was really cool. But, you know, that as far as metal goes, you were kind of at the tail end of the new wave of British heavy metal, and you're kind of the pre-Sunset Strip stuff. So I kind of, from there I went on to medical school where music stopped because there was just no time. So from, you know, 85 to 89 was my 4 years of medical school. 90 was my internship, which was, you know, 120 hours a week in the hospital. So music was pretty much done for a while. And if you think of what happened from 85 to 90, that was thrash. You know, that was the whole speed metal thing. That was Megaforce and Shroud, was all those things. So I didn't get into Metallica until later. And to be honest with you, I mean, the first Metallica songs
because they didn't get a ton of airplay. Even on Masters, and obviously Kill 'Em All got zero, unless some super cool metal station somewhere that I don't know, you know, in some city. Sure enough, fuck not my city. And then Ride the Lightning got zero until later, you know, For Whom the Bell Tolls. But Master Puppets got, you know, got a little bit more, and then we were just talking about, you know,
the Black Album.
Yeah, 2 albums later, you know, skip Injustice for All, and there you go. We're back to an off-air conversation we were just having with Bill.
So you really could say that Enter Sandman was like the first Metallica song that I listened to at any length, because it's just like the first one that came to my attention. And then I went backwards. And as I went backwards, I have to say that Kill 'Em All was the first one that totally captured me, because Kill 'Em All is the most new wave of British heavy metal of all of them, because that's what Lars was so inspired by, and that's what I grew up listening to. And I told you guys before, like, the day that Iron Maiden's first record came out, I was at the store to buy it, because I've been reading about it in the British weeklies, you know. And like the day, one of the very first records I got there was Motorhead's Louie Louie single, which was like their testing single, you know, to get a song out there, because their first record was such a flop. I mean, I was there buying shit every single week, you know, with Saxon and the very first Def Leppard when they were a rock and roll band. Saxon, man, I get Wheels of Steel. And a funny little story though, when I grew up, you know, the big bands were, you know, REO Speedwagon, Journey, that sort of stuff, but like AC/DC was a big popular band. And I dug that stuff, of course, it was fine, but I was much more experimental. But nobody in my school, like you, nobody would listen to it. If it wasn't what was on the radio, if it wasn't what everybody else was listening to, there's no way they would listen to it. So,
but we had a nice little tastemaker club of metal, and so I was pretty happy about it. We're all lunch together, which made it even more bonus. So it's like pretty much every lunch, that's pretty much probably all we even talked about.
Yeah,
it's kind of crazy.
The thing is that the only way I got some of my friends to listen to Saxon is I brought them over and told them I had a demo of the brand new AC/DC record.
Wow.
And they were all jamming and they go, yeah, this fucking rules. You know, this is AC/DC, that's awesome. I go, fuck you guys, it's not AC/DC.
That's amazing.
I just posted a picture of me and Biff and my buddy Scott.
I saw
we were downtown. Right? You saw that picture, right? Big old Biff. Todd, you seen that on Facebook? It's a crazy picture.
I saw it. Yeah, it looks like you were down in the downtown area, right?
Pretty much. After the show, like they just played a festival that we were at, and when Judas Priest played, a bunch of other cool bands. We were just down there getting drunk watching this metal cover band that it's Spandex Nation, of all things, what it's called.
No
And
way.
they're wearing wigs and shit. And we look over, and there's Biff and like a couple of the guys from Saxon just at the bar where you just buy these big, massive draft things from these girls that aren't dressed much. So we just walked over there and said, hey, we talked to them, we hung out with them for like 30, 40 minutes. They could give two shits. It was crazy. They were funny, and they're always fun to party with British people.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So randomly different and enjoyable.
A big part of the new wave of British heavy metal. That Wheels of Steel album was classic, and then Strong Arm of the Law, which came out next, was those were both really solid albums.
You know, something you mentioned earlier, Todd, about how you were reading reviews and it kind of made you excited for these releases, and you were the first to kind of line up and stuff, and it just reminded me of back in the day, in the 90s for me, just how crucial these reviews were ahead of, you know, your choice to go and pursue an album, because there really was no other way to check it out except through the imagination that was stoked by the reviewer.
Absolutely, and MTV didn't exist either, and there really was no outlet for seeing bands at the time. I remember when I was a kid, probably 15 years old or something like that, I stayed up to midnight so I could watch a performance by Kiss on the Midnight Special, you know, and it blew my mind because you never had a chance to see it. You just had the album covers. And of course, back then, and you have to transport yourself too, because this is before Kiss became a mockery or whatever, Gene Simmons became a mockery.
Yes.
He
speaks the truth.
They were everything then, man. They had that image. And so you had very little opportunity to see things. And so in American stuff, I got every Cream magazine, and I got every Hit Parader magazine. In fact, I still have stacks of them. I have stacks of old Cream magazines. And I love going back to read the reviews now, because it's so much fun. Oh,
that's hilarious.
But you're bringing up a really cool thing, though. For the British stuff, like I said, it was Enemy Sounds, and I think it was Melody Maker. But I was actually thinking about this myself. In today's age, and all that you do, Billy, you're the perfect person to talk to about this. I was wondering, is there still a role, or what is the role for rock and roll journalism these days? Because, like you said, I learned about Maiden, I learned about everything that was happening in England by even just advertisements sometimes, but usually from show reviews and record reviews and just people writing about this stuff. And even though I'd never heard it, I knew I wanted to hear it. I knew I had to buy it. Nowadays, you know, stuff is, even before it's released, it's already up on YouTube or on this, it's on Spotify. I mean, everything's at your fingers. Yeah, you don't have to go to a tastemaker now. You can find it yourself. So I'm going to ask you this question because of all that you do. And, you know, we still have the ripple effect going also. But what do you think the role is for rock and roll journalism these days?
I think my perspective is to bring more depth to what you're listening to. I always assume that, well, I don't always assume. I mean, these days I know that a lot of listeners are just overwhelmed by all the choices out there, so they may not in fact have listened to what you're purveying. But at the same time, with a niche blog like Doomed and Stoned, focused on doom metal and stoner rock, it's fair to assume that most of our readers are already inclined to listen to that kind of thing anyway. So I see my role as to briefly introduce the band, but really from there go into a story. It's all about, the motto is the music and the stories of the heavy underground. I think stories we have to be storytellers again, because you know, that whole MTV generation was fed on stories and imagery and all these things that we don't have as much today, or if we have it, it's really scattered abroad through lots of different social media that you could totally miss just as easily as, you know, you missed 80 whatever through 90. And me, I didn't mention, but I missed the grunge era myself, mainly because I was really sheltered in a fundamentalist household that didn't allow that shit, and I was also homeschooled during that time. So it took me joining the military before I caught up with the grunge scene in the mid 90s, and I did a lot of tracing back myself. So between Guns N' Roses and my Army days, that was my gap. So,
Right.
you know, for me, the lore, the stories are so important, and so I really try to get into not only stories about who these people are, but the stories behind the music, how it's created. Also, really getting into the lyrical content in a way that it's more than cursory. And it's not that I don't write a lot of quick cursory reviews, but that's what I aim for. I really enjoy writing long form pieces when I have a chance for that reason.
Right.
Yeah, really well put. Well put.
On a random note, you mentioned grunge. The two of you, you know, basically was not much of a part of your musical thing. Guess what I was doing?
You were in jail. You were in jail somewhere.
Jesus Christ, no. I was in college.
You were in college, weren't you?
I was in college when all that was happening, and I was the kind of guy that got into music a lot earlier than others. And so I had Soundgarden, Loud Love, or whatever, early on, and Alice in Chains' first one. And so the stuff just started happening around me. It was like, oh, Pearl Jam. I read the Pearl Jam review in Rolling Stone. And I remember reading it and they mentioned Soundgarden and they mentioned Alice in Chains, and I just went and bought it. I never heard it before. I just went to the store and bought it.
It still blows my mind.
Generation X, we did that all the time.
Yeah.
You didn't have to hear the radio sometimes. You just
took a chance on it.
BMG and Columbia House
Yes.
taught us that.
Those clubs.
And that was very smart. And Beavis and Butthead snuck a bunch of shit into us. How about that?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that.
You know, it still blows my mind that in the late 80s and even way earlier, there was Melvins, there was Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, High on Fire, and when I think about 1987, 1988, those are not the bands that come to mind. You know, it's the radio rock that stands out the
unfortunately,
most.
that's when the big labels grabbed it.
Yeah, it's like
they made music for women a lot of times, like the slow kind of typical crowd where the girls would never listen to metal, but now when they see this on the video and then they hear the melodicness of the songs, it was a match made in heaven. And that's why you always had a lot of women in those videos, because the music was made for them. So us metalheads that were like into Megadeth, Metallica, and hell, Scorpions, whoever, when that all happened, we just left. We're just like, all right, I guess metal's done, you know, for a little while. And there was so much good alternative rock in like early heavy rock of Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, that it was easy to just maneuver through that hair metal phase, which is disgusting.
the underground is just doing such a different thing, which is just baffling to me in a way, you know, because my only awareness before I got cut off of MTV was of the hair metal scene, early Metallica, and Guns N' Roses really was the breakthrough. I think that said, okay, this actually is a pretty deadly genre, guys. And it scared the hell out of a lot of people. Def Leppard was awesome too, but
they kicked that door open. We don't even remember so far back in history, but that album was a monster. I mean, like a monster of, you know, just this new age awesomeness of how much they just kicked every part.
Oh yeah,
don't get
me wrong, album. It was impressive, but Guns N' Roses made it dangerous.
Yeah. I remember it. I was literally in college for that. Like, we did a spring break beach week, and that was playing on Daytona Beach the whole weekend. And my buddy rented a house that he lived in on the beach because he went to college down there. And all weekend was Guns N' Roses, Guns N' Roses. Appetite was just like an addiction for us.
What are you talking about besides Guns N' Roses? I missed that.
He said Def Leppard, didn't he?
Yes, Pyromania.
Oh man, I used to like you.
I'm saying statistically.
Oh no, and I got no problem. It's a great.
Yeah, that wasn't really.
Record.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it definitely did open a ton of doors. But for me, Def Leppard was the original EP and On Through the Night when they were a fucking harebrained, crazy metal band, and even High and Dry a little bit for me.
That's what I like is High and Dry.
Yeah, I had to kind of get back when High and Dry came out. Okay, High and Dry came out probably 1980 or 81. and I really disliked it because I disliked it the same way that I disliked Number of the Beast, and I disliked anything that came out after Blackout, because Scorpions had been around since the 70s. Scorpions were raw. I mean, for me, Animal
totally different
Magnetism,
band, 70s,
right.
80s.
But Animal Magnetism is, like, to me, the
Great
ultimate,
album.
yeah, the ultimate Scorpions album. And to me, when you get to Maiden, you know, the debut is the ultimate album. I have nothing but love for Killers. But when you got to Number of the Beast, when you got to High and Dry, and certainly you got to Pyromania, what happened is that as the production was increasing, as all of the money behind these records started to increase, they lost the immediacy for me. Pyromania is a slick album. It's great written songs. It's wonderfully produced. But it lost the immediacy that On Through the Night has for me. And to me, there's a certain guttural reaction to metal that is based upon the passion and the immediacy, and that's what I was getting from the new wave of British heavy metal.
Right.
I'm not downplaying any of that stuff now. Blackout is genius, and I actually
it's a great album.
Yeah, Blackout I didn't have a problem with when it came out.
Get this.
But these other ones, it's just like they got a little too slick. I wanted it rawer. I wanted it rougher.
Sure.
At the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, Scorpions was the band that got my radio taken away and me cut off of rock and heavy metal from that time on.
Mine and Rudolf Schenker say thank you.
My mom walked in on me, and you would have thought I was looking at a Penthouse magazine or something, the way she reacted. I mean, it was just so stereotypical. I don't remember what song it was. It was on the radio, but it was just, like you said, so raw and visceral that I think it was shocking
like a
for
hurricane,
her.
maybe.
Yeah, and I was just like, holy shit, this is the jam. And
if she ever saw the import version of the Love Drive album cover or the Virgin Killer album cover, that would have been done.
Exactly.
Virgin Killer, man, you would still be at home right now.
Right, you wouldn't even be allowed to bring it in. But my first concert was Love at First Sting, ever in the history of me. Concert was that, and the opener was Fastway.
Nice. Nicely done.
Cast Eddie Clark.
Done. Okay, so if we're going back to how old we are, my first concert ever was AC/DC with Bon Scott, Cheap Trick, Ted Nugent, Blue Oyster Cult, and Journey was the headliner. That was my first show.
What year?
80, I think. Woo. It was the If You Want Blood tour for AC/DC. It was before Budokan came out for Cheap Trick, so it was long before Highway to Hell came out. Nugent was probably touring on Cat Scratch Fever still, I think. Maybe he had an album since then. Journey was the hometown band, so they were huge back then. And Nugent was a wild man. People forget how good of a guitar player and how crazy Nugent was as a performer. His mouth has overshadowed the fact that he's a hell of a guitar
Absolutely.
player.
Yeah, he's kind of a legend live. That's for sure.
I will argue to this day that Stranglehold off the first Nugent album is the sexiest rock and roll song ever recorded.
I might be right there with you, and it was definitely one of the best classic rock songs that's ever been made. I mean, it holds the test of time in its authenticity and rawness and great vocals. I mean, come on. Why did Nugent not figure out how to have that guy sing a lot more?
Well, that's what happened. Is that Derek St. Holmes sang what became all the hits, and Nugent, his ego wouldn't allow that, so he fired the
that's
guy.
horrible. Well, not all the hits, right? But a lot of them.
Well, most of them, yeah. I mean, like, I think that he...
Cat Scratch Fever?
The earlier hits he did. I think that Nugent probably seen Cat Scratch Fever by that time, but the early stuff, Derek St. Holmes did it all. Which is when he got fired, he joined up with Whitford from Aerosmith, and they did the Whitford St. Holmes band for a little while.
Barely remember that. Okay, so Billy, get us back on track here. What are we supposed to do here?
Yep. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Ripple label and some of the songs that we've been digging from the Ripple label, and we've selected some. We're kind of free-forming it tonight, so we could follow this very formally like we usually do, or we can just kind of bat around different recommendations. But each of us prior to the show have picked out several songs that we'd like to share and talk about. And I guess in preparation for that, Bucky kind of gave us the 10-cent version of how Ripple music started, but how did it start for you, Todd?
You want the quarter version then?
Let's put in another quarter or two, yeah.
Okay, so Ripple started on a whim, totally. I was, my friend Pope, who you guys know, he has been my buddy for about, now for over 20-something years, but at the time, 15 years or what have you. And he and I were really into music together and comic books and hockey. That was like our world. And he was the main person to get me back into new metal as this whole time period lapse that I was telling you about, because Pope's like 9 years younger than me, so he was of a slightly different era. And I met him during my residency, so I was kind of opening up to music again. And so the first band that he turned me on to, which I totally dug, was the Opiate album, the EP or the album by Tool, which I fucking love that record. Yeah. It's insane. And I returned the favor by turning him on to stuff that he had never heard, because he was just a punk and a metal kid. He was in a band, which was a crossover metal band at the time. And so I was turning him on to whatever, Cat Stevens, Seal, whatever, Van Morrison. I got him totally hooked on Van Morrison. Just a different sort of stuff that he had heard.
Why are you being mean to people like that?
Dude, you cannot diss the first 4 Van Morrison albums or 5 albums.
You're breaking my heart over here.
No, they're so fucking good.
All of them, Jesus.
So we started the Ripple Effect blog just to do it, just to write
You do
about
Van
music.
Morrison stuff? The blog?
I don't think I've ever reviewed Van Morrison. I don't think it happened.
What was the other band you said? You said a few bands. You introduced them. No, it wasn't.
I said Seal.
Gloss over Seal. That's really weird. But what was the other one?
Cat Stevens.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Oh fuck, dude! I have every Cat Stevens import and bootleg you can find. I love fucking Cat Stevens.
People get disappointed when they find out he didn't sing Cats in the Cradle. I love it when they do that.
That might be true. So anyways, Pope and I, we had this big connection there with music, and so we wanted to write, and we were going to do a zine. This is the good old printed zine days, and we never got off our asses to actually get it done, but we'd been writing reviews for it. And then I had a friend who had started a blog on Blogger. Remember, this was, this was 2007 now, so this was 13, almost 14 years ago. So Blogger was a relatively new platform back then. And I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So I just boom, 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 created the Ripple Effect, and I posted our first review. And we had 0 expectations. Our greatest goal was maybe someday, just maybe, hopefully maybe someday, some label would send us like a promo CD. And that was going to be like the epitome of having made it. Well, the very first review that ever was published was a band from Scotland called APB, which was a Scottish funk punk band that were insane. The bass player's out of his freaking skull, Ian Slater. And they're really, really good. And I just put up a review of this album that I had. And like the very next day, the drummer contacted me, thanked me for the review, sent me the new record, and we were off and running. The Ripple Effect's been going now for, like I said, about 17 years. And
incredible.
As we were going, or 13 years, I guess. Sorry, more tequila. As we were going forward, I'm really, really into the proto metal scene. Of what happened when psychedelia got really dark, but before rock radio kind of took over. It's kind of like that whole pre-metal thing, which started essentially around the time of the first Sabbath album, but it wasn't just Sabbath. You guys know this, of course. There's so many bands in that era that you can just explore. And I started really digging deep into it. There was an article that Sleaze Grinder wrote for Classic Rock on this, and I was just kind of going through band after band and buying what I could. And then I was reviewing it, and I reviewed the JPT Scare Band, original, heavy, really heavy acid rock purveyors from the 70s who never even released anything in the 70s. They recorded the 70s. Their first things were only released 20 years later in the 90s. But so I wrote a review on one of the JPT scare bands. It was a compilation because it blew my mind. The guitar player was insanely good, and I got an email from that drummer. I guess drummers are the ones who write people. I don't know. And I formed a friendship with him. And over the time, he and I just kept communicating about stuff. And next thing you know, he sends me a big stack of unreleased masters. And I listened to it. It was all fantastic stuff. And I wrote him back. I said, dude, what do you want me to do with this? I can't review it. It's not released. And he goes, well, I don't want you to review it. I want you to release it. And I'm all, what? What the fuck are you talking about, man? I'm a fucking ophthalmologist. I don't know how to release a record. What are you talking about? And, but it happened to fit into kind of, where I was at the time. The ripple effect was what it was, and it was cool and fun. But in truth, it probably would have faded out because Billy, you've been around long enough to see so many blogs come and go.
Yeah.
And it was like, let's take this up a notch. And I kind of looked at Sub Pop, which started out of a zine and created an entire label out of it. I did some research at the time of what it meant to be a record label. And you have to, again, picture this. This is 2009 that this was happening. 2009 is almost the absolute nadir of the entire recording industry because Napster was out. Everything was being stolen and uploaded and given away for free at the second it's even released.
Right.
Record sales had not started yet. Vinyl records were still really only cult things that were played in the clubs. And CD sales had plummeted. So I chose that time to start a record label. And I did it actually by selling off my comic book collection to finance the record label because you have to have capital up front. And I told my wife we wouldn't use our capital. And the first record we put out was JPT Scare Band with Acid Blues is the White Man Burden. We did everything you could think of, man. Our first release was a double LP gatefold, two-tone psychedelic, translucent. We did everything.
You just went for it.
If you think of 2009, but I'm a vinyl guy. I wanted a vinyl record. So our very first record was a double LP, vinyl and CD, of course.
That's awesome.
No digital. There was no digital at the time. This is before fucking iTunes, man. You didn't have downloads you could get from.
That's true. That's true.
But it sold out, and there was enough fans for that music. And then, Puba came to us, and Puba is another one of those legendary proto metal bands. And since then, we've had the chance to work with. We reformed Iron Claw for their record because they'd been broken up. They formed because of a review I wrote about their record. Bang, we've worked with.
Yeah.
I almost worked with Sir Lord Baltimore. That just got a little bit dicey there. I've talked to a lot of these legendary bands, and it is what it is. But that's how Ripple started.
Sir Lord Baltimore. Wow, that was one of the first proto metal bands that I discovered. Absolutely, just changed my entire understanding of music history.
Doesn't it though? I mean, it really does. And there's so many bands in that category though, whether the UK or US. You had Jerusalem and you had Josepheth, and there's so much stuff. I mean, that original Iron Claw recordings are insanely good. There's so much stuff. I'm really kind of a connoisseur of it because I buy it all, whether it's May Blitz or Buffalo. I mean, there's so many good bands.
God, if we had Mike Varney on here, he would be listing a bunch too, huh?
No, dude. The person, totally. I mean, Varney, number one, is insane about all those retro, the heavy psychedelic stuff. He's so knowledgeable of it. But at the time, the guy who I was talking to about all this was Tony Reed. And Tony was the most dangerous man in the world to talk to because Tony and Varney would be a conversation that would start, and 8 days later, we would still be recording what they're talking about. Because they're two encyclopedias. And at the time, I didn't know Mike Varney yet. I knew Tony, and he and I would talk, and it was every time I was on the phone with him, it was like a fucking $400 conversation. Because he's like, have you checked out Blues Creation, the Japanese one? I'm all fucking eBay scanning Blues Creation. That's $150. Oh, it's worth it. Okay, I'm buying it.
Right.
But let me tell you a quick story about Varney, because one of the first times I ever met Varney, he contacted me out of the blue. I was kind of freaked out about this because I'm an ophthalmologist. And who am I doing getting phone calls from Mike Varney? But he called me up, and he was in the area still. He lived here before he moved to Vegas. And he goes, dude, he probably didn't call me dude, but essentially he said, dude, let's go record shopping. Cool, you got it, man. But record shopping for Varney does not mean record shopping, it means CD shopping. He actually at that time had sold off his entire vinyl collection, which I think was, tens and tens of thousands of records he'd sold off. And had converted everything that he wanted into CDs. Makes sense, takes up less space, you get more bonus materials. I mean, CD is still a great format.
He sold his collection of records, yeah.
Yeah, I think that he bought his house in Vegas just when he sold off his records.
No way.
So we went to Rasmussen's Records in Concord, and this you have to picture this, because this is really the first time I've ever met Mike Varney. And I'm walking with him in the record store. We're walking down. It's a huge record store. It's a good old-fashioned big record store. And we're walking down these massive aisles with these huge bins of CDs. And Varney's flipping and he's picking up CDs. He's basically throwing them over his shoulder. And I have a basket. And I'm walking behind him, and he's going, you need this one, you need this one, you need this one. And I'm like catching them in the air like I'm a clown catching the juggling balls. That was my first experience with Varney.
That's awesome. That sounds like my first experience with somebody much less distinguished, a guy named Bradley, Private Bradley, on our first release midway through basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. He took me to the local PX, and he did the same thing. You need Alice in Chains, you need Soundgarden, you need this, you need that.
That's cool.
And he probably never led you astray.
He didn't. I led myself astray, because I would pick up a few things. Oh, I've heard this song on the radio, and so I pick out a Dishwalla CD, which we talked about last week.
Stop. You picked up Wham.
Luke Ours was an okay song.
Yeah.
Jeez, Dishwalla.
We don't need to go into that again.
Yeah, back to that. What did we start this show off with? What was that song?
Okay, well, tracing back, 40 minutes ago, we kicked things off with the live CD from the Watchers, and we heard the song Starfire. This is an incredible little EP. I really enjoy that one.
Yeah, Tim is kind of a local legend here, and by local I mean he's in my immediate area. I'm in the San Francisco Bay, and you think of the San Francisco Bay Area scene, but I actually live a little bit east. I'm on the other side of the Berkeley Hills, so I'm out in an area called the Tri-Valley, which up until recently had really been just kind of sleepy ranch town. And Tim's had started the band Systematic and got signed, as you guys probably know, by Lars Ulrich to Metallica's label. And they toured with Metallica for a while. So Systematic had, its moments. And then from there, he went on to form White Witch Canyon and then Spiral Arms. And I got to meet him when he was still in Spiral Arms because he had recorded the Zed record, Desperation Blues. And I got to know Zed because they sent that record in for review, really. And I fell in love with it, and I signed up to Ripple. And that got me to meet Tim, and then Tim and I became friends, and now he's a local guy for me. I love it. I hang out at his studio when he's recording. I was just there. He's recording a guy called Thaddeus Gonzalez, which is really killer stuff.
He played one of my shows.
Oh yeah,
I helped him out down here for a quick. Actually, won my show, but I set him up. We'll say. Yeah, Thaddeus, good stuff live. Jeez.
Yeah, he's a total rocker. And then, Spiral Arms was signed. They were with SPV. And it wasn't really ever going to be that I was going to work with Spiral Arms, but right around then, of course, the band broke up. Tim and Cornbread, who's been the bass player since the White Witch Canyon days and was in Spiral Arms, they formed the Watchers. And Tim asked me if I, check it out. Went to a show, and Jeremy Von Epp is just like a guitarist.
Sure.
Oh, dude, I think that when Metal Sucks premiered the 4-song album, they had it nailed. They go, who the fuck thought of putting a shredder guitarist with a stoner band, and why the fuck didn't somebody think of this beforehand? Because he's insane.
He does.
And live, the guy has nothing but passion. And then you got Carter on the drums, he used to be with Orchid. So it's a solid fucking professional band. But
it's one of the best bands out there.
They love what they do. So we have a new album coming soon. We did the Sabbath Highway EP. Then we got Black Abyss, which to me is just the fucking insane record. We put out the live EP, kind of like a little stopgap measure while we're waiting for the new record to come, which I think is coming pretty quick.
How did you guys choose what 4 songs you wanted to have for the EP?
Well, Tim did that, and it's, they had recorded this show up at in Santa Rosa, and I think it's as simple as that those were the 4 songs that had the best fidelity.
God, cool.
Yeah, I think it was that simple. But
they sound good.
You can't go wrong with their entire catalog. I mean, they're just insane. And Tim and Cornbread also do a tribute band on the side. If you've ever seen what they look like, their tribute band is Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers for ZZ Top. And of course, they look so much. They have the moves down. They got the beards. It's awesome. They're fun.
I've seen them. They're great.
Oh, Carter drums in that band too. I don't want to dismiss Carter there. He drums.
Yeah, Carter's got the full. He's got the facial hair too.
Yeah, they're perfect. I mean, again, musician-wise, you can't argue with any of the 4 of them. And Tim is a consummate frontman. If you've ever had a chance to see him, he's been doing it. He knows what to do.
Billy, you ever seen The Watchers?
I haven't yet. No, not yet.
You never have? Oh man. Well, you weren't going to come down to the Ripple Tenure show, right? I think I talked to you about that.
Yeah, that was in the cards originally.
Well, you still will. It's just not going to be the Ripple 10-year party anymore. It's now going to be the Ripple 10-year anniversary party. Crank it up to 11, motherfucker.
I love it.
Year.
Oh, that's perfect.
And we're going to do all the same bands, I hope, and we'll do 2 nights again, and I'll have you come down again.
All right, I'm there.
There you
and
go.
the Vultures will be playing.
Oh, awesome. And then, kind of moving into your catalog and especially to more recent releases, you're pretty keen on this band Lowcaster. And maybe tell us a little bit about these guys and the song you've got picked out for us.
Absolutely. So the song I picked out for you is called Pilian, which is off of the record we just did near the end of last year. Lowcaster, another local band, another band which you'll see when they perform at the Ripple 10-year anniversary party. Crank it up to 11, motherfucker! And they're a local band. They had an interesting story. I'm going to butcher their story a little bit, so I'm going to apologize to the guys, but I think they'll appreciate what I'm trying to say. I saw them play as an opening band at a show that Zed headlined with Devil to Pay and Lowcaster. And I'd never heard of Lowcaster before. It was their self-done album, which was, to me, really good. There was something kind of cool there. It maybe wasn't, out of the ordinary, so to say, but they were solid. And so I just kind of kept my eye on them a little bit, and they disappeared. And it turned out that what had happened is that they had a tragedy within the band, and that took them out of commission, just completely off to the side. And when they finally were able to resurrect themselves, they poured all the emotion of the tragedy into this album called Flames Arise. And I'll be honest with you, and the band knows this, is that when they sent it to me as a submission, I really wasn't very interested in it at all, because I hadn't heard anything from them in about 2 to 3 years. And it's like, you don't want to, you have to be active as a band. It's signing to a label doesn't really mean anything unless the band is as committed to making something happen as the label
Exactly.
is. It's a synergy, right? And I hadn't heard anything, and I live in the area. They live in Oakland. They're right around the corner from me. So it's like, you guys, I don't know, and it's getting near the end of the year, and the schedule's packed, and when somebody sends me a submission, just so you know, the way I listen to it is always dependent upon what I see in the schedule ahead of me. You know what I'm saying? If my schedule's full, I'm going to hate everything you send in because I don't want to sign it. I don't have time. But if I have openings, I have a little bit more of a generous ear because I have the space for it. I had no space for this. I had no ear for this album. I had wanted nothing to do with it. But I have a policy, and John knows this. I listen to every single submission that ever gets sent into Ripple, every single one of them. And 90, 95% of them will get a letter back from me. Because as an artist, the one thing you hate more than anything in the world is to be ignored.
Right.
I can listen and not like it. That's my preference. That's just me. Those are my ears. But at least I listened to it. And typically, I'll listen and I'll say something what I liked or what I didn't like. If I like it, but it's not right for me, I'll refer them to a label like DHU or Argonauta or Magnetic Eye. Based on every label's kind of got their own sound, right? So if it sounds, this sounds like a DHU release, I'll send it over there.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you can help the bands out. So anyways, I put on the Lowcaster, and I couldn't stop listening to it. And
wow.
I didn't want to sign this band. I wanted nothing to do with them. They know this. Again, this is a joke between us all.
Yeah.
But it just captured me because it's so evocative and it's so atmospheric and there's so much passion because you can feel that they're just releasing all this tragedy that they had. And Susie from Broom, who I absolutely adore.
She's amazing. Yeah.
I love her. Yeah, but the whole band. But my wife and I are huge Susie fans. She guests on 2 songs, and they did their album release party with Broom, and Susie performed with them on stage, and it was transcendent. It was just amazing. So
was that a concept album?
I don't know the truth for that one. I'll be honest with you. I'll say I think it is.
I feel like it might have had some storyline. We'll have to look it up, but Billy will look it up because he loves theme albums, like concept album.
Yeah.
It's talk to the guys, man. The thing about this record,
I think you'll like Lowcaster, Billy.
Mm-hmm.
They're a cool band. They've got different sounds.
The reason I chose this to play, because everything else that I've chosen for you is new stuff that you guys haven't even heard before yet.
Right.
Debuting on your show. But Lowcaster's not. Lowcaster's from last year, but it got overlooked. I love this album. I think this one should have been one of the best reviewed albums of the year, and everybody who listened to it did give it a great review.
Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
But it didn't get listened to enough. End of the year, a lot of stuff, blah blah blah. Other
yes.
coming out.
And you had a monster year, Todd. I mean, you had a monster year with a lot of amazing stuff, and
right.
Sometimes that's going to happen, man. Even if it's
right.
released simultaneously or close within their counterpart for that month, it's tricky, But
why,
you have just so much. It's really a tribute to you. It's just you've done an amazing job curating.
Because with your show, I could go back and shed light on this album that I think got a little bit pushed off. So this is Pilian by Lowcaster.
We'll be listening to that in just a moment. John, why don't you just briefly talk about your pick, and I'll talk about mine. We'll take a break here.
Okay. I picked Freedom Hawk, who just got off a very successful tour. They literally went deep into coronavirus land, and then they had to stop. So they actually played within some of that spectrum, and crowds came out. Every single show, Mark was telling me, big shows, good crowds, people fucking fired up. It was really impressive to hear it because that's one of the top heavy rock bands in the world, and they're on your label, Top. And Freedom Hawk, they recently put out this Brutal Winds video, and I'll never forget watching Mark popped it out there. It had like 50 views, and of course people just start sharing around, and the thing's at 12,000 views now. It's an amazing old school vibe Freedom Hawk song, just 2 guitar riffing, just the vocals, it all works together. And Brutal Winds is a kick-ass song off a really good album, Beast Remains, in 2019.
Yeah, great band in every way. We had a chance to see them at Doom and Stone Fest. Great guys too. This is one of their best. I don't want to move so fast that we don't give Todd a chance to tell us any inside information he knows about these bands and these releases. So we're not like completely a slave to the clock here. Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, tell us about what's up with Freedom Hawk, how you got them, and what's next for them as far as and tell us a little bit about what's going on with these guys. Great band.
Freedom Hawk, yeah, they're amazing. They're definitely one of the flagship bands for us right now on the label. Great guys and great musicians, as you know. John, the performance they did for you at the Planet Desert Rock was...
Oh, my God, yeah.
That was one of the highlights of that whole night there. And the thing that blew me away is how many young girls came for Freedom Hawk. There was all these women in the front, and I'm going...
Well, there's some girls I know that they're around the scene, and when they get to those shows, man, they just... Woo! The show has a whole different energy.
I had a new Bon Jovi on my hand or something there for a minute. No, I think they're working on their new record now. I mean, other than the fact that everything's kind of shut down with Corona, and bands even can't get together. But you're right, the tour was great. The records are selling great. They came to me a while back. There was Small Stone, and there was just some contractual stuff, and they wanted to know if I'd be willing to work with them. And of course I said yes. And
of course
I did, right. Beast Remains came out in 2019, and we also went back and did re-releases of two of their earlier albums, the original Freedom Hawk and Sunrise, which had never been really released before. One had been on Meteor City, which had been out of print for ages and ages and ages, and the other one never had a vinyl issue. So we've done 3 Freedom Hawk albums right now, and I will do as many albums of those guys as they can stand me, because I worship them. They're phenomenal. And I got to get them out to, I'm going to try and get them over to Europe next year to play at the Ripple Fest Cologne in Europe next year.
I mean, they're one of the best for, I would say, for heavy rock in the accessible side of things. Something that when just normal rock people hear that kind of band, they're actually like, oh, wow, that's cool.
Well, I'll give you one little insider bit of information, and I don't think TR will be upset with me for this, but the vocals are different on this record. They weren't double tracked like they used to be.
Yeah.
And he was a little anxious about that. Artists are always a little anxious when they're putting themselves out in a slightly different way. And he sent me the pre-production and just goes, "Can I do this? Is this okay? It's such a different vocal, and you guys have heard it. It's phenomenal."
Yeah.
And I said, absolutely, this is perfect. We're going to go with it just like this. And he agreed. Obviously, it's his decision, not mine. And then when the reviews started coming in, and everybody actually mentioned the vocals at first and how it was different, how much they loved it, I think that we might be able to expect that'll be the vocal tone from now on.
Okay. Nice.
Sometime or another, someone's got to tell Brandon every once in a while to put on a shirt. Brendan O'Neill, class act. That guy kills it live. Such a good addition to have him in there, playing guitar with TR. It's just